In February 1959, Sam Cooke recorded an entire album dedicated to Billie Holiday while she was still alive. Critics at the time questioned why a young pop star would attempt her catalog. The album sold poorly. 5 months later, on July 17, 1959, Billie Holiday died. The tribute that had been intended as a living honor became, almost overnight, the closest thing to a eulogy that her music would receive from another major artist. Sam Cooke didn't know he was running out of time. He just made it before the clock ran out. On July 17, 1959, Billie Holiday died in a New York hospital. She was 44 years old. Years of addiction and the specific toll of a life lived under enormous personal and professional pressure had worn down a body that had carried one of the most influential voices in American musical history. She had spent her final months in declining health, in and out of hospitals, her career and her finances both having suffered from decades of struggle that her artistry had never fully been compensated for. The news of her death reached the people who had worked on tribute to the lady within hours. The specific speed with which news of a major artist's death traveled through the music industry, where everyone who had worked alongside someone, however briefly, felt the loss as both a personal matter and a professional one. The album that had been recorded as a living tribute, made while she could in theory have heard it and reacted to it, while there remained some chance that word might reach her that a young rising star had spent 2 months in a Hollywood studio working through her songbook with evident care, was now something else entirely. It was the only thing close to a major artist eulogy that her catalog would receive that particular year, released months before her death rather than assembled afterward in the more typical pattern of posthumous tribute albums. The chronology mattered. Sam had not waited for an obituary to tell him that Billie Holiday's music deserved this kind of attention. He had paid it while she was still here to, conceivably, receive it.
Billie Holiday had shaped what Sam Cooke understood singing could do long before he ever recorded a note of his own. Her voice was not technically perfect in the way that voice teachers measure perfection. It was something else entirely, an instrument for emotional precision, capable of finding the exact ache inside a lyric and holding it there without flinching, without softening it into something easier to listen to. She had come up through the jazz and blues clubs of the 1930s, had recorded with Lester Young and Teddy Wilson and Count Basie's orchestra, had built a body of work that critics and musicians alike regarded as one of the defining achievements in American vocal music. By the time Sam was old enough to be paying close attention to other singers, Holiday's recordings were already part of the foundation that any serious vocalist studied, regardless of genre. Sam had grown up on gospel, where the voice was trained to reach for transcendence, for the specific quality of sound that lifts a congregation towards something larger than itself, that uses technical control in service of an experience that goes beyond the merely musical. Holiday's voice reached for something different. It reached for the specific weight of a life that had not been easy, and it delivered that weight with a control that made the pain bearable to listen to without ever pretending the pain wasn't there. Where gospel asked the voice to lift a listener up, Holiday's particular genius asked the voice to sit beside a listener in difficulty and not look away from it. Sam wanted to understand that quality. He had built his own career on a different kind of emotional directness, the gospel-trained clarity that had made You Send Me and his early hits feel effortless, intimate, immediately accessible to audiences who had never set foot in a smoky jazz club. Holiday's artistry operated by different rules. It asked the listener to sit with discomfort, to receive a kind of beauty that did not resolve cleanly, that carried its difficulty openly rather than smoothing it away into something more commercially palatable. Sam had spent his career demonstrating that he could find depth inside simplicity. Holiday's catalog offered him a chance to test that ability against material that did not make things easy, that demanded an interpreter willing to sit inside complicated emotional terrain rather than glide across its surface the way his pop singles were built to do. He decided the way to understand what she had built was to try to build something of his own inside it, not to imitate her. That would have been both impossible and, to anyone who understood Holiday's singularity, somewhat disrespectful in its presumption. He decided instead to take her songbook and find his own way through it, the way a musician studies a master's work not by copying it, but by working through the same material and discovering what the material asks of a completely different instrument with a completely different history.
Sam Cooke was, in February 1959, a 28-year-old pop and R&B star with hits on the radio and a young audience that had little connection to the jazz and blues world Billie Holiday belonged to. Recording an album of her standards was not a commercially obvious move. It risked confusing his audience, alienating the people who wanted more of what You Send Me had given them, and entering territory where he could be unfavorably compared to an artist whose interpretive command was considered nearly unmatched in American music. His producer, Bumps Blackwell, and arranger, Renee Hall, built a sophisticated orchestral backing for the project: strings, horns, a level of arrangement that signaled serious artistic intent rather than a quick commercial exercise designed to capitalize on Holiday's name. Sam was not doing this for the charts. The charts, as it turned out, did not particularly reward him for it. He was doing it because he wanted to. The sessions took place at Sound Enterprises on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, spread across January and February of 1959. Renee Hall conducted a full orchestra: strings, horns, a rhythm section built for sophistication rather than the up-tempo arrangements that had made Sam a star. Benny Carter, one of the most respected saxophonists in American jazz, played on the sessions and would later write the album's original liner notes, a credential that signaled the project was being taken seriously by people whose opinion on matters of jazz authenticity carried real weight in a way that mattered to Sam, even if it would not move many copies. Sam recorded 12 songs from Holiday's catalog: God Bless the Child, Good Morning Heartache, Solitude, I've Got a Right to Sing the Blues, reinterpreting them in his own voice, finding his own way into material that had been inseparable from Holiday's specific phrasing for decades. When the album was released in April 1959 under the title Tribute to the Lady, the response was mixed. Some listeners and critics questioned whether Sam Cooke, young, smooth, associated with pop crossover hits, had the right instrument or the right life experience to inhabit songs that Billie Holiday had filled with the specific weight of her own survival. The album sold modestly. It did not register as one of Sam's significant commercial successes, and some considered the entire project a mismatch: a polished young singer attempting the catalog of an artist whose voice carried decades of difficulty that Sam, at 28, had not yet lived through in the same way Holiday had.
The criticism was not entirely unfair, and it was also not the whole story. What Sam delivered on Tribute to the Lady was not an attempt to replicate Holiday's specific suffering or her specific vocal techniques. It was something more honest than that, an acknowledgement, built into the structure of the project itself, that he could not and would not try to sound like her. He brought his own voice to her songs. He found in tracks like God Bless the Child and Solitude a way to access genuine feeling without borrowing someone else's biography to do it. The arrangements gave him room to explore a more mature, more textured side of his abilities than his pop singles typically allowed. A glimpse of a vocalist who could do considerably more than the hits that were currently on the radio, who had range and ambition that the commercial machinery around him had not yet found a way to fully showcase. The album was, in retrospect, one of the clearest signals of where Sam's ambitions extended beyond the commercial formula that had made him famous. He was not content to simply repeat the success of his early hits. He wanted to demonstrate range, depth, the capacity to sit inside difficult emotional material and do something honest with it rather than something merely pleasant. Tribute to the Lady did not achieve commercial success in 1959. It achieved something else, a documented moment of an artist reaching past what was expected of him, regardless of whether the audience of 1959 was ready to receive it on those terms. Sam could not have known, while he was recording those sessions in January and February of 1959, that the woman he was honoring had only months left to live. Holiday's health had been declining for years, the consequences of addiction and the accumulated weight of a career and a life that had demanded more of her than most people are ever asked to survive. But decline is not the same as an announced deadline. Nobody recording Tribute to the Lady in that Hollywood studio was working against a clock they knew was ticking. They were simply paying tribute to someone whose work mattered to them in the present tense, while she was still alive to be paid tribute to, with no particular urgency attached to the timing beyond the ordinary scheduling demands of a recording session.
When Billie Holiday died in July 1959, the timing transformed what Tribute to the Lady was, an album that had been conceived and executed as a living honor, as one major artist's contemporary acknowledgement of another, made while there was at least a theoretical possibility that Holiday herself might hear it, became, in the space of a single news cycle, something closer to a eulogy. It was reviewed and discussed differently after her death than it would have been discussed had she lived another decade. The same 12 tracks carried a different weight, the same orchestral arrangements, the same vocal performances, the same specific choices Sam had made about which songs to include and how to interpret them. All of it was now being heard through the lens of loss rather than the lens of contemporary homage. This is one of the strange mechanics of how tribute works in popular music. The intention behind a piece of art and the meaning it eventually carries are not always the same thing, and the gap between them is often created by circumstances the artist could not have controlled or predicted at the time of creation. Sam Cooke made Tribute to the Lady because he admired Billie Holiday's artistry and wanted to engage with it directly, while she was alive, to potentially encounter what he had made of her songbook. He did not make it as a eulogy, but 5 months after its release, that is largely what it became, one of the only major artists' acknowledgments of Holiday's catalog to exist before the wave of tribute albums that would follow her death over the subsequent decades, from Anita O'Day's Travelin' Light to Rosemary Clooney's Here's to My Lady years later.
Sam Cooke had, without knowing it, made it in time. He had recorded his admiration for an artist he respected while she was still alive to be the subject of that admiration, even if she likely never heard it, even if the commercial response was muted, even if some critics felt the match between performer and material was imperfect. The timing, accidental, unplanned, owing nothing to any awareness that Holiday's life was approaching its end, gave the album a permanence that pure commercial success might not have given it. It became a document of one extraordinary voice reaching toward another, completed just before the second voice went silent forever. Tribute to the Lady remains a complicated entry in Sam Cooke's catalog. It was not his most successful work commercially. It was not, by the assessment of many critics, his most fully realized artistic achievement, but it was an honest one. An attempt by a 28-year-old artist at the height of his commercial powers to step outside the formula that had made him famous and engage seriously with an influence that had shaped him before he understood he was being shaped by it. He did it while there was still, however briefly and however theoretically, a chance that the person he was honoring might come to know about it. The clock ran out 5 months later on a July day in a New York hospital. Sam had already finished what he came to do, months before anyone, including Sam himself, understood why the timing would eventually matter as much as it did. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe. Every day we tell the stories behind the music, the tributes that arrived just in time and the ones that almost didn't. Hit the like button if you believe that honoring someone while they're still here is one of the most meaningful things an artist can do. And tell us in the comments, did you know Sam Cooke recorded an entire Billie Holiday tribute album 5 months before she died? Because almost nobody talks about how close that timing actually was. We'll see you in the next one.